The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets about what matters most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
Nobody tells you that nobody really cares about your dream. Not your mother or your wife or your children. They don't care if your dream doesn't come true. What they care about is you and also the garbage and when you're going to take it out. You alone have to care hard. A dream is a baby that will die if you let it.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. This episode is the first in a summer series I'm calling Sad Stories Told for Laughs. In this series, I'll be talking with writers and performers about their public humiliations, the book signings that nobody showed up for, the shady concert promoters, the hostile audiences, the bad reviews, all for your entertainment and edification, dear listener. The first guest on Sad Stories Told for Laughs is memoirist Harrison Scott Key. His first memoir, The World's Largest Man, is one of the funniest books you're ever going to read. His second memoir, Congratulations, Who Are You Again?, also hilarious, tells how the first memoir came to be and what happened next. Harrison seemed an obvious choice for Sad Stories Told for Laughs. Harrison Scott Key, I sure do appreciate you being on the Habit Podcast and agreeing to be the inaugural guest for my summer series called Sad Stories Told for Laughs.
Well, I got lots of sad stories, and the world seems to want nothing to do with them but laugh at them. So I feel like this was made for me, man.
Excellent. Well, the title of your 2018 writer's memoir kind of summarizes the spirit of this whole endeavor. Congratulations, Who Are You Again?
Yeah.
Because we have it in our minds that somehow if we get published or get a record deal or get an exhibition or whatever, that somehow we will no longer be obscure and that we will enjoy the esteem of everyone around us. But as your title says, Who Are You Again is more of the more likely outcome of.
It's the saddest title I could think of.
I think release day, in my experience, is the loneliest day of a writer's career.
They say that it's good to have a friend nearby, just to call in case you're feeling anxious. Want to take a lot of pills. I remember I woke up on my pub day, and I thought my wife would at least get me balloons or something, And all my kids were like, "What's wrong, Dad?" I'm like, "My dream came true. It's fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Nobody cares. It's fine. Thank you for asking."
Yeah. I try to write, when writer friends release a book, I try to sent them a note or something that said, hey, just so you know, it's not unusual this to be a lonely day. Because, again, you might be a little less obscure that day than usual, but probably just a little less obscure.
Yeah, it's good to have an activity on pub day. Have something to keep you occupied. Go plant some flowers or something, because the calls will not be coming in.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, one of your lines that you must be pretty proud of, because it's on the back of the book and it's in the first chapter or two, and then it's at the end of the book, and that is, a dream is also a monster that wants to eat you. And that becomes kind of a organizational principle for your memoir. Tell me about that.
Well, you think about dragons and monsters and beasts and things coming at you from the chaos. But what, in my experience, any sort of grand creative dream, you kind of become the thing that births the dragon. You become the chaos from which the dragon emerges to then eat you. And a dream, if you're lucky enough for your dream to come true, then you better armor yourself and sharpen your sword, because the dream will try to consume everything in your life. There's no middle ground. Like, you work so hard and finally the thing gets out there in the world. And as soon as it gets out there, I'm sure there's some Mesopotamian myth about it or something at some point, because as soon as the dream gets out into the world, it turns around and wants to destroy you. It wants to take over everything that you became to manifest it. It wants to destroy all of that.
Huh.
It's wicked, man. And that's why famous people go crazy. That's why celebrities do drugs and, all these mug shots and things of, celebrities busted for drunk driving and all that. Not that you can also be completely obscure and unsuccessful and get busted for drunk driving, as we know, as my brother knows. That's what happens, is that it, because that's, I'm sure there's a Bible verse that's applicable to this. It's not in the book of Revelations, but it just seems that the thing that you most want, when it finally happens, you can't possibly have known what it would be, because if you had, would you still have done it? And the answer is probably frighteningly yes. But you're like, you have a new job. Once that dream gets out in the world, you have a new job, and the job is, the first half of the job was, how do you become extraordinary, right? How do you finally write a book, finally make a movie, finally release an album, and, play on David Letterman or, whatever shows exist now? And how do you become extraordinary? And as soon as the dream is real, the question becomes, how can you become ordinary? How can you stay human and not so extraordinary that you destroy all your relationships and lose your personality?
The desire for fame seems to me is a desire to be loved by people that you can't love back. And
that's really deep.
And that can't end well,
No, fame. So fame at its best is it's just a marker of something, right? It's a marker that the bomb landed. It landed and it exploded and it detonated the target. The fame becomes this marker. So if you're just pursuing the fame, then in some sense, you never quite get there. Like, you have to remember that it's just a marker. It's just a symbol of this other thing, that your work is out there in the world. And I have tried to remember that. So now, when I was wanting the markers of the fame, when I was wanting to get on the Times bestseller list, or to be on Fresh Air, or to be on This American Life, or to be on the Today Show. I remember a time when they had authors of novels on the Today Show. Like, I don't even know if they do that anymore. You're so badly wanting that, and then realizing, like, even now, my first book came out 6 years ago. My second book came out 3 years ago. I'll get, messages on social media every day, and they're not public, they're DMs. And it's somebody talking about how this book like hit them at a pivotal point in their life. And I'm like, oh, I wanted fame, but that's actually the real thing that you want, is the person who's telling you that the book changed them. Because if that happens to one person, then the project was worthwhile. If that happens with one person finds it and experiences something similar to what you experienced as you created it, then it's worthwhile. But the fame becomes this thing that you think you want exponential, multiplied experiences like that. But it just brings with it so much more. People you can't love back. Is that what you said? Fame
is desire to be loved by people, the people that you can't love back.
Maybe, can I add an addendum to that? Maybe it's a desire to confuse your creation with the thing that is, to confuse yourself with the thing that is loved.
Huh.
There's something about you create a thing that's been separate from you, like this is my second book, and it's separate from me. It's obviously emanates from me. And so when people love that, that's great. That means they buy it and tell their friends about it. But I'm not that. I'm this other thing. I'm connected to it. And so to confuse, so that's what helps with your reviews, right? You read bad reviews, you feel like they're criticisms of you. They're not. That's commentary on this other thing that you made. And other people's negative reviews of what you've created, honestly, is just a reflection of their own pathologies and how their parents didn't love them enough. And every writer knows that. But it's a confusion of the creator with the creation in some sense.
Yeah. How many bad reviews did you read before you understood that, or that you got that sense of separation enough to find that less painful?
I don't know. I couldn't, if I counted them up, it'd be too many. I think it was it was probably a long, long process and maybe probably a year after my book came out. I mean, because I got a lot of reviews on Goodreads and Amazon and every review that was published, like an actual review of authored by a reviewer, those were all positive, because most people don't waste times to review. They don't review books they don't like. It definitely took a while. You have to get to the absurd with it. You have to, at some point, you have to realize you are not reading the private thoughts of what people think of you. Yeah. You are reading the public thoughts of what people think of a thing that's not you. Yeah. But writers love to brag and talk about how they don't read reviews. Those people are liars. They're all lying. Everybody reads the reviews, and it's so great. And at this point, reading a bad review is kind of exhilarating. Yeah. Because it's like, man, at least they finished it. At least they finished the book. At least they cared enough to publish this. That gives me hope in society and civilization, that they cared enough to tell somebody they hated something. That's great.
Yeah. I wrote a short little biography of St. Patrick years ago, and this was such a gift. I got 2 1-star reviews, and one gave me 1 star because I was obviously anti-Catholic and didn't understand anything about the Catholic Church. And the one next to it gave me a 1-star review because I was obviously a lapdog of the Pope.
Obviously.
And I was like, okay, those are so diametrically opposed that I can get some separation from this.
Like, once you realize, you get stuck at the office talking to the crazy person who works at the office, and the person who everybody's out to get her, and the world and God and fate are all out to destroy her life. Yeah. When you realize that that's really the kind of person who writes 1-star reviews, it's that kind of person, then you can be entertained by them. I mean, I remember one of my favorite bad reviews was, it said something like, read this book if you want to know how not to do a family. I was like, that's why I wrote it. Like, nobody writes a memoir who has the happy family. Like, somebody said that my dad should be in jail And it was like a 1-star review. I was like, my dad didn't write the book. Like, give me 5 stars. I survived. But whatever. I just want to hug these people.
Yeah. I think it's maybe the last chapter of Congratulations, Who Are You Again? You have a list of sort of things that people ought to know that nobody tells you when you publish a book. Would you mind reading some of that?
Yeah, I'd love to. All right. Nobody tells you that nobody really cares about your dream, not your mother or your wife or your children. They don't care if your dream doesn't come true. What they care about is you and also the garbage and when you're going to take it out. Your friends might ask, hey, friend, how's that dream going? But nobody's going to be upset if the dream dies. And mostly they will not ask because they will already know. You alone have to care hard. A dream is a baby and it will die if you let it. But if you nurse it up and make it real, even then, nobody really cares. And even if they do, their love for what you've made blooms and dies like a roadside daisy. Their love does not endure. It is not eternally begotten. It's not their place to care. That's your job. Oh, they talk. The neighbors and bloggers and people who ask for a photo with you, they talk as if your book is so good that it should be given to new parents at birthing centers and attached to tiny baby parachutes and dropped behind enemy lines. They speak like this and you believe them. Thank them, but do not believe them. Nobody tells you that on any given day, when you are to appear at a bookstore or a book festival, a surprising number of all your friends in that town will message you that regrettably they are unable to attend because a family emergency requires their attention. Many of them have to leave town for a funeral, they will say. Everywhere you go, people die. You will be honored to read one of your stories at the War Memorial Auditorium, original home of the Grand Ole Opry. More than 2,000 seats waiting to be filled. You will walk out on stage thinking of all the legendary acts that have stirred this room with their gifts, and you will see that only 20 people have come. And you will try to laugh and try not to cry. Nobody tells you that so much of dreaming is filling imaginary rooms with imaginary people. Nobody tells you that you will perform in state houses, sanctuaries, synagogues, city council chambers, train depots. These are all real, by the way. Train depots, school auditoriums, county fairs, casinos, in the ballroom of the Hotel Monteleone and on the grounds of a derelict French castle, and even at the annual meeting of the Georgia OBGYN Society. Long, horrific displays on transvaginal mesh and fetal scalp electrode placement. Why have they asked you to speak again? Is this a joke? Nobody tells you that sometimes your dream will feel like a joke. Nobody tells you that you will change. Will cease reading reviews, that one day you will be able to go hours without checking your Amazon ranking. You will find yourself in the park staring into the trees. I had a publicist once, you will say to the squirrels. His name was Philip. Nobody tells you that whatever your ambition compels you toward, to make books, buildings, clothes, advertisements, machines, life insurance policies, robots who keep making sequels of lesser and lesser quality, whatever it is, the journey to greatness makes fools of us all. And I'll stop there.
That's great. Yeah, one of the sort of rubrics for Sad Stories Told for Laughs is unusual venues. And so I liked your list of unusual venues there. How was it that you ended up at the OBGYN conference?
The medical science is unable to determine the answer to that question. I think what happened, and this often happens, I think they needed something not about transvaginal mesh. I think every conference always needs some sort of speaker who's just out there in left field. Sometimes they need somebody to clear the air. I think in this event, a lot of the spouses came to it. Mm-hmm. Because this was like something for the spouses who didn't play golf. This was down in Sea Island, Georgia. So, one of the great playgrounds of the East Coast. And it's just so funny. And I walked through all the lobby where they had all the tables set up. And when I told people, I had a badge that said I was a speaker. So of course, every pharmaceutical rep at the conference was introducing themselves to me. And I was like, I'll take whatever samples you have. I can't give you any business. I'm sorry.
Tell me about your desire to be on Terry Gross and how that dream got crushed.
Well, so books are, fighting for attention, especially with streaming services and the way, people spend most of their time, their entertainment dollars spent on films and TV shows. And those are things that are fun to watch and relatively easy to consume. And so books really struggle with getting attention. And, one of the ways, there are a handful of ways you can get attention. The best way to get attention is for a celebrity to Instagram a picture of themselves with your book. I mean, that's as crazy as that is. And that's not a dig against the industry. There are so many books to choose from and so few sort of ways to tell. I mean, that's what the New York Times bestseller list does, is it kind of tells people, hey, pay attention to these books. So you're looking for some way to get your books to the right people. And, during the process of learning to write and becoming a writer and writing that first book, I listened to a lot of Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and also the New York Times Book Review podcast and a few others. This was back in like 07, 08, 09. And really just I was relatively isolated living in Savannah, Georgia. Savannah is a great creative town, but it's very small. And there are only a handful of other writers and authors here. And so listening to those podcasts was a way to sort of feel like I was in the world of writers, and writers would talk about their books and how they got successful and how they wrote them and what it was like. And so Terry Gross was sort of my lifeline. And so she sort of became the idol of my age. She became this person. I'm like, well, if I can get on her show, then because every author she would interview, every now and then, she'll interview a film director or something like that. She interviewed a lot of authors, and she treated her authors treats. I haven't listened to her in a while because she's dead to me, but she treated authors with the same respect that she treated like real celebrities that everybody knew. And I loved that. It didn't, not that I'm, vain and want to be treated like a celebrity, but I love that she didn't say, well, now that, Tommy Lee Jones isn't here, I guess we'll have a writer on. There's more. She really elevated books, and you could tell that she had a great research team, that she would read the books, and that really, there are some people who ask questions, and you're one of these people. You get interviewed by a lot of folks, and you can tell when somebody's read the work, and it's a lot of work to read a book. It takes time. You have to read it. You can't do other things. You can't go throw the ball with your dog while you're reading a book. And so I felt like this woman understood books. She tried to understand authors. And so she became my sort of benchmark. If I could get on this show, people would find my book. Because every author she interviewed, I went and found their book, and I read most of them. So I thought, well, other people are going to be like me if they hear me on her show. And I got this close, Jonathan. I got that close. I got an offer. I got a pre-interview, where a producer calls me. And I talk about this in my second book. It was not great because this was in 2015. And so the Black Lives Matter movement had just really begun, and people were trying to take down the Confederate battle flag from the South Carolina State House. And my book came out about a month before that. And so my first book was obviously a lot about rednecks and the white experience and the South and sort of what's good and terrible about the South and how I sort of escaped that, but also sort of rediscovered the beauty of parts of that. So it was relevant a little bit to what was happening in the world, but only tangentially. But that week that the producer called me to interview me about being on the show, that's all anybody in America was talking about. Should they take this flag down from the South Carolina State House? And Ta-Nehisi Coates, his memoir had just come out, and everybody was, reading that, and President Obama was, tweeting about that and whatnot. And so it's her first question, so she wasn't, it was the guy actually, the producer was not in the mood to laugh. When people have read my book, they come in ready to laugh, and they are laughing before the interview even starts. And that's so good. And everything gets lubed up and fun. And this producer goes, their first question was, what's your position on the Confederate battle flag? And I was like, oh, this is going to not go well at all. Like, even if I told them everything they wanted to hear, and which I talked about, what was wrong with the flag and why it was, but it wasn't funny. Like, it was all serious.
Yeah.
And so I knew immediately these people would not have me on, because this was a serious topic that they wanted to come at from a serious angle. And so somebody funny like me, even though that I feel like I probably exposed more of what's pathological about the South than any NPR news report ever could.
Yeah.
They couldn't handle the truth I was bringing. So it just never happened. It was the saddest day of my life.
Are you saying that it just happened to fall that way, or were they looking for some white Southerner to ask questions to?
I think they were looking for a book that might shed some light on one angle of that story. And because my book had just come out and it was about the South and the sort of, experience of a, young redneck sort of wrestling with, I talk about the Confederate flag in the book. So it seemed like, well, maybe this is a way to do it. I think a book like Hillbilly Elegy, which is, has as much of a sense of humor as my dad's mom did, which was zero. Yeah. That's more of what they wanted. And that book came out, I think, a few months later, and that book took off because that book, Hillbilly Elegy, really had this sort of perspective of what it was like sort of the rural white experience, and personified it and humanized it in a way that was palatable and frankly boring. I'm sorry if the author's listening, but that's a great book, and they ain't made a movie of mine yet. They should. I've written a screenplay. If anybody's listening, you can find me on social media. But when you write humor, people don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to talk about it, and especially people who aren't from the South. I mean, I got so many calls from NPR producers and journalists and interviews where they're like, did this really happen? Like, can you talk about this? Some of this seems made up. Whereas when I would be interviewed by people like you, or, people from New Orleans or places like Houston or Savannah, people from Florida, they would always say things like, they didn't ask if it happened. They lived it. Their first question was, I think we may be related, which wasn't even a question. And so anytime I did talks up north, above the Mason-Dixon, or did interviews with people who were up north, I always had to deal with people who disbelieved what I had written about, and fearful of it, because it was these terrible, rednecks and crackers down south. You can't write funny about that. This is serious stuff that's ruining our country, or that has contaminated, the Constitution or something. And so it was just not a good year for national coverage for my book. Maybe it will be one day, but it was rough.
There's so much that's out of your control when you. Oh yeah. I mean, actually, I'm going to phrase that. There's so little that is in your control besides writing a good book.
That's so right. And you have to trust that, it'll get to the right people. And it has. And one of the things, a buddy of mine, Eric, who's the sales rep for HarperCollins in my part of the country, he's a great sales rep. But he reminded me, because when I was sharing with him, I'm like, nobody wants to talk about this really funny book about white people in the South right now because of what's happening in the world. And I totally got that. And I didn't blame God or anybody else for that. And he just reminded me that a great work of art is evergreen and will be around for a long time. And he said, your book, what he said was, your book will be in our back catalog for a long, long time. And people will keep ordering it because it will never go out of style. So these things are happening in the world, and they were started in 2015 really in a big way, and really continued on through 2020 and even now to our present moment, are really important things for the country. So I'm not going to hold any grudge against the nation for dealing with our past sins. I adapted the first book into a screenplay, and when Netflix read it, they said there were too many white people in it. When in fact half of the characters are black. So it was against them for assuming all these people were white. And then Disney Plus said there was too much violence in it, which tells me that all those people have a really great education. Because the violence in it was so much less than it was in real life. Yeah. So anyway, that was great feedback to get. At least they were reading the screenplay though.
Yeah. Yeah. When I went off to college, I was like, well, where are all the fist fights? We had I started to say we had a daily fest, but there was kind of like a morning show and an afternoon show. Usually there was one in the morning and one in the afternoon at my school.
Oh, yeah. You can't do it in the middle of the day. Everybody's too tired to do it. But you have some early morning stuff, and then I'll see you in the parking lot. I'll meet you in the parking lot. Meet you at the field house.
Yeah, at Warner Robins Junior High, we had the Slab. It's called the Slab, and it was just a place where a house was supposed to be built, and it didn't get built, and it's. As I remember, it was kind of stubbed out with plumbing, and it was just across the little ditch from school. And that people would say, "Meet me at the Slab." That just echoed,
Oh, that's a great title for a poem or a novel. The Slab. Slab. That's so awesome.
Well, I'm glad to hear there's a screenplay of The World's Largest Man. I'm sorry to hear that you're having a hard time attracting attention. Who's going to play your dad in this movie, in your mind?
Well, so I'm working with a producer on it, and we've talked about a lot of different people. Nick Offerman was one. We talked about Woody Harrelson would be great, and then we talked about him playing my dad because he's the key with playing my father is that you have to be really frightening and like also really funny. And that's a hard mix in an actor, but I feel like Woody Harrelson really captures both of those feelings.
I was picturing a version of John Goodman.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. John Goodman wasn't as old as he is.
Right.
The film takes place in the 80s when my dad was in his late 30s. But yeah, a very John Goodman character, a big guy who.
Funny and a little menacing.
Yeah, funny and menacing. That was Pop, man. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, Harrison, we better wrap it up here. Thank you for getting Sad Stories Told for Laughs off to a sad and funny beginning.
Can I read? I appreciate that. I want to read the epigraph to the first chapter. It's very short.
I would love
I feel like this really encapsulates sort of the series that you are putting together here, which is a great idea. I came across this. I don't remember where, and this is a 19th century immigrant lament is how I have attributed this. I came to America because I heard the streets were paved with gold. When I got here, I learned three things. 1, the streets were not paved with gold. 2, they were not paved at all. And 3, it was going to be my job to pave them.
That's great.
Nothing summarizes the human experience or the creative life like that. So I wanted to end with that.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you. And I appreciate your reminder that we can't expect other people to care about this work. It's our job to care about it.
It is. And you know what? As hard as it is and as difficult and as sort of disillusioned as you can get when you do something great, I would change nothing, and I'm living my best life. I'm the luckiest man in the world that I get to write these things, and I make light and tell funny stories and make fun of myself. But when I get to sign books for people, or I get a message from somebody who really felt something strong when they read one of my books, or I get to talk to you, man, this is everything I've ever dreamed of being. And I feel like all of my ancestors, my father and grandfather and great grandfather, they didn't have something like this. And to live in a country and in a time where I get to do something like this, as much as we make fun of it, life is pretty dang good. And I'm a very blessed and lucky man. And thank you for asking to talk to me.
Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com, and to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate. Special thanks as well to Taylor Linhart for letting us use her song Diamonds as the theme music for Season 3 of the Habit Podcast. You can learn more about Taylor and follow her work at taylorlinhart.com.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.